Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me up at the back? You okay? Fine. Lovely to see such a packed auditorium here today. It's fantastic. This is obviously our inaugural West Coast edition of Expo. The ones across in Edinburgh have been hugely successful. This one looks like being even more so. So that's good. It's great to see you. We've got a genuinely packed program today with a fantastic lineup of keynote sessions here in the main hall, but there are also 3 other sessions running simultaneously across the day in various locations. So the format's quite simple. From 10 o'clock in the morning till 3 p.m., the sessions will run on the hour, every hour. They'll run for 40 minutes, and that gives you a 20-minute break between the slots. We'll then have an extended final session and free drinks from 4 p.m. If you're looking for event details, they're on the conference app. You've been emailed a link, and there are QR codes located around the venue. Please turn your mobile phones to silent if you haven't already done so. I've just done mine. But if you're tweeting, please use the hashtag #DigitExpoWest. No fire alarm test scheduled for this morning. If one goes off, it is for real. So don't muck about. Please just get out of the building. Don't wander about once you've got out of the building, because we need to be able to count heads and things like that. And event staff will guide you to the nearest exit. Actually, if you really want to live forever, just follow Raybug. You'll be first out the door. There's lots and lots of people here today. You may know many of them, but you may not know lots of them. So it's a chance to actually meet new people, make new contacts, possibly new business contacts. It's worthwhile going up and saying hello to people. They'll probably appreciate it too. Loads of the exhibitors, and there are quite a few I've never seen before, are running competitions, swag giveaways, that kind of thing, and draws. Prices include Sony PlayStation, a Porsche 911, and that's the Lego version, £100 Amazon voucher, Ray-Ban Meta AI sunglasses, and much more. So basically, these are free events. They're free events because the exhibitors come along to these things. So if you can support them, please do. Go and have a chat to them. See what they're up to. Find out if there's anything that is useful to you, and hopefully bag yourself a prize or two at the same time. So enough from me. I'm going to hand you across now to our first speaker, who's Ed Parsons, Geospatial Technologist from Google. And I'm looking forward to this one because it's something that affects me more or less on a daily basis. Ed's going to be talking about how maps have changed. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ed Parsons.
Well, good morning, everyone. And Mark, thank you very much for the introduction. It is really lovely to see all your faces, particularly this early in the morning when everyone's got energy, you've just had a coffee. I used to be a university lecturer, and I had to teach statistics to a bunch of undergraduates at 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. A very different audience to you guys, or at least I hope so, anyway. My job for the next half an hour or so is to talk to you a little bit about how we have all become navigators, how we now use technology to go exploring the world, and how that change, and it's a relatively recent change, has kind of impacted a little bit on society, and I think it's in a good way. And I'll touch on many of the hot topics of discussion at the moment, talk about AI a little bit, talk about ethics and privacy and so on. But fundamentally, I think it's about how we now see the world around us and we can go explore, how we can all become navigators. A little bit about me. I've been Google's Geospatial Technologist since way back in 2007. So in Google language, I'm what's called a greygular. I have grey hair. I've been at Google longer than many other people. But I've been involved in geography throughout my career, both in the public sector, working for Ordnance Survey here in GB, but also working for some American software companies as well. And as I said, started off as an academic. But fundamentally, I'm involved in what's now called geospatial technology. I prefer the good old-fashioned word geography. I'm a geographer by training. And it's about understanding the world around us and that understanding helping us in our day-to-day lives. And as Mark pointed out, one of the things I think that's most exciting about the change in geography is suddenly relevant again. It's something that we all use on a day-to-day basis, largely because of those applications that sit in our smartphones. But I want to take you on a journey to start off, just to prove that geography isn't well, in some ways it's a stage discipline, but it's something that is continually changing. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to take you on a journey to the New York Public Library in Bryant Square in Manhattan. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to go there. It's a lovely old building. In the basement of that building, they have an archive that you don't normally get an opportunity to visit because it's got lots of valuable items and artifacts, one of which is this. This is the Hunt Lennox globe, dating from 1504. It's probably one of the oldest globes that we know about in existence. You know, about the size of a large grapefruit. It's an amazing thing if you get an opportunity to see it. As you would imagine, in 1504, our knowledge of the world was limited. We had a good idea of what Europe looked like, fair idea of what North Africa looked like, this vague idea there was this thing in North America, but around the other side of the world, the Pacific, as we recognize today, really didn't have much idea of what was there. And if you look on the globe for what we now recognize as the Pacific, you won't see it particularly clearly, but the text there in the middle says, Hic sunt draconis, here are dragons. I.e., we don't know what's there, but be careful. And it's that sense of, well, we've got a good idea about some parts of the world, but other parts of the world, we're not so sure. And the reality is today, there are still Hic sunt draconis in our maps. There are still parts of the world where we don't have full knowledge. Our expectations in terms of what a map looks like has improved, has increased over all of this time, but it's still something that we continually work on. We are still working on improving maps all of the time because, as you will all know, the world changes all of the time. In real time, we have to keep track of that. But the biggest change, I think, is that suddenly we have all become navigators. And I don't mean navigators in the sense of, here's a Second World War flight sergeant in the back of a Lancaster bomber navigating across, a dark occupied Europe night. We are all explorers in a way that we weren't previously. We are all taking information from the applications that we have in our devices, and those devices are allowing us to navigate, to explore in a way that was fundamentally different to just maybe 20 years ago. And it comes through having an application on our mobile device. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about Google Maps, but actually it's pretty much fundamentally the same whether you're using Apple Maps or Here or any of the mapping applications that you might have on your mobile device. I just so happen to work for Google, so I'll use examples from Google, but it's fundamentally the same principle behind what's going on here. And the fundamental difference here is that the map, the thing that we use to navigate, has changed from being something that is purely passive, i.e., we look at a fixed representation of the world, to something that now is interactive. We use a map, and the map changes depending upon what we're trying to do at a particular point in time. And that map becomes an interface to other services, other systems, other types of information. So where it was previously just a passive exercise, you opened up your Ordnance Survey map and you had a look, or your A to Z map, or your Nicholson's Street Guide, and that was a static thing. It was printed at some point in history and didn't change. Now, the map itself is dynamic. It's continually changing, representing how the world around you is changing. And also, as you use the map, it is changing based upon what you are doing at any particular point in time. And actually, what the map looks like is changing as well. It's becoming much more immersive. We have a generation who've grown up playing computer games since as long as they can remember, which are, in their nature, immersive experiences. You're in an environment that is 3D, that is changing, and we're trying now to represent the world on maps in that sense, where we represent traffic by moving vehicles on the map. The map changes depending upon what the local weather is like. It will be raining in the map if it's raining in the area that you're going to visit. So it's not the representation of maps in that abstract sense that we thought of in the past. And I'm going to come back to that as maybe as a point of concern, as a point that we need to think about. Also, remember, we use maps that kind of recognize or recommend places that we might want to visit. Once upon a time, those recommendations would have been based on particular categories. So I want to visit, say, a Thai restaurant, or I want to go to a boutique type of hotel. And we relied on businesses, relied on databases that categorized different destinations. Now we take an approach that's much more what we term qualitative. We can say, well, actually, here are some images of particular types of restaurants that perhaps your friends or other people in your social network have liked. We'll use those images to recommend similar types of locations, similar types of business. So it's not about fixed categories, it's much more about the sense of place. What does it feel like to be in that particular destination? And then, of course, in our vehicles, we make a natural assumption now that not only will we have satellite navigation that will get us from a destination A to B, but increasingly with semi-autonomous vehicles, the vehicle itself will drive us there automatically. And although a lot of that autonomous driving is based on geographic data behind the scenes, mostly it's about machine learning. Mostly it's about vehicles recognizing the environment around them and driving, but much more precise than it used to be previously. And not simplistically saying, oh, you want to get between A and B as fast as possible. It might be that actually what's more important to you is having the lowest carbon emissions, or even finding a route that's more picturesque than another route. You know, time's not so important to me. I want a route that I'm going to enjoy driving. I want to, drive 500 miles through the Highlands. I'm looking for not the quickest route, but the route that I'm going to enjoy the most. Let's look at how, though, all of this has changed, and it has been relatively quick. So this is Google back in 2006, 2007, in the beginning of mapping. And you can see what the map interface used to look like. What was interesting is it only really covered North America and actually the UK. That was the first bit of Google Maps coverage. And on the screen here, you can see you had to ask either for a map of a location or a map of a business or to get directions. They were three separate applications, if you like. It wasn't all joined up in the same way that it is today. And the reason that we had a map in Google was to meet what remains the Google mission statement, to organize the world's information, to make it universally accessible and useful. And that still is Google's mission statement, about organizing all of the information that we're creating online, trying to pull out that piece of information that's going to be useful or relevant to you at any particular point in time. And actually, it's as an organization method or an organizing principle that geography is important. Because about a third of all of the searches that people do on Google are actually about locations. They're about places. They're about activities that might happen in a particular place. So we use geography to organize that content to say, well, probably if you're looking for a bar and you want to find a good cocktail bar, you're probably going to be interested in cocktail bars in Glasgow as opposed to ones in Manchester because you're in Glasgow. You take that for granted, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of mechanics to make that work. What really made the difference was when we took maps, we digitized the content, and then along came the mobile phone. And it's easy to forget that actually there were smartphones, there were mobile phones on maps before the iPhone. It was emerging slowly, but clearly the iPhone made the big difference. And if you've never had the opportunity to watch on YouTube the original iPhone launch that Steve Jobs did, you should watch it. It's a fantastic example of product marketing because, God bless him, there was an awful lot of vague, I wouldn't say mistruths, but overselling of the capability of the iPhone in that particular demonstration. You might remember that he ordered coffee for everyone else in the Moscone Center in San Francisco. What we forget is actually the original iPhone had no way of knowing where it was. It didn't have what we now recognize as a GPS receiver in it. It was pretty much broken in that sense. The first phone with a GPS receiver in it was the Nokia N95 that was relaunched in September 2006. I had one of these phones. It was a great phone. The little blue dot there representing your location, was the killer feature of the phone. However, if you switch GPS on the phone, it would run the battery down in about 15 minutes. So it wasn't particularly practical at the time. And actually, it's still an issue. And a lot of the smart that goes into a smartphone today is about battery management and reducing the amount of time you have to have the GPS switched on. And when we talk about GPS, actually what we're talking about is what's officially called GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite Systems, because there is more than GPS. GPS is the American system. Galileo is a European system that works in the same way. There's a Chinese system called Baidu. There's a regional system in Japan and a regional system in India. The smartphone that you buy today will use all of those satellite constellations to give you that little blue dot, that location on the map. But that blue dot, that location on the map, is core to what makes maps interactive today as opposed to purely passive. When you look at a map like this is the area of southwest London where I live. It is dynamic and it is unique to me based on that location information that is being sourced from GNSS, GPS services. So you can see the roads being shaded in different colors. As you'll know, that represents the speed that is happening in real time along those particular sections of road. That doesn't come from sensors. It doesn't come from any information that's in the environment. It comes from people's mobile phones. And if you've got a mobile phone in your pocket and you've chosen to share your location, even a small number of people contributing their location allows us to build a map that shows you where the speed limits are for any particular road. You can also see an icon. That's my son. That's where he was at that particular point in time. Here's the deal, parents. What I do is I say, I will pay your phone bill, but you have to share your location so I can keep track of you. That's the deal. It works for me, might not work for you, but that's where he was at that particular point in time. And you can see where roads are closed and so on. Now, I always used to struggle to explain to people how this worked. Said, well, it's based on people's mobile phones contributing information, saying how fast they're moving, and then we bring all of that together in a system and we can play it back. I was helped enormously by this street artist in Germany, in Berlin, who started walking around the neighborhood with a load of phones in that little trolley, all running Google Maps. And so for the Google Maps algorithm, that looked like a traffic jam. So he would be walking around creating this traffic jam as he made his way through Berlin. Thank you very much for doing that. That really helps me explain it. We've changed the algorithm now that we can stop that happening. But it I think is an important point of truth that I will now make quite forcefully, in that because maps are now this kind of interactive thing, you're both using the map, but by using the map, you're contributing information back. The best map is the map that's most used. The map that's got the most users, by its nature, will now be the best map because the map is self-healing. As environmental change is happening, as a road opens, let's say, the Forth Bridge closes, the fact that loads of people are now not crossing the bridge feeds back into the system, and we can change the color of the road becomes red, we'll send fewer people in that direction. It's self-healing. The more people you've got using the map, the better the map will be, because it's trying to reflect the real world. How we reflect the real world is also changing. This is a Street View car. You'll all be familiar with Street View, that final level of zoom that takes you onto the street corner of a particular map. Street View was how we at Google got into machine learning and AI in many ways. So way back, 10, 15 years ago, we had the problem of trying to identify people's faces and car registration plates from all of these images that we'd acquired, because for privacy reasons, we needed to blur them so you couldn't see people's faces, you couldn't see car registration plates. But we've expanded that now to say, well, if we want to recognize where speed limits are, we need to be able to recognize signs. And that's not an easy thing to do. If you think about what speed limit signs look like around the world, we've developed algorithms now of machine learning so we can recognize all of those different styles of the speed limit signs and start to build databases that tell us what the speed limits are in any particular destination. The next step on is taking those machine learning algorithms and applying them to satellite imagery, the sort of data that you'll see in Google Earth. And we produce now a database of 1.8 billion buildings. Every building in Africa, for the first time, is on a map. The Hicksent draconis, Hebe dragons. Well, there's huge parts of Africa. We've got very vague ideas of actually what's happening. So having this for the first time is a big step forward. We've made that data available to NGOs to start to build up development databases. And the final point where we're at today is this concept called digital twins. The idea of a digital twin is you take a geographical database, a model of the world, but it's a model of the world that doesn't just represent the world as it is now, but can model how that world will change based on environmental changes or something changing in the environment. And the obvious example of that here in Glasgow is we can actually look at what's the impact going to be on a flood event somewhere upstream on the River Clyde, model what the catchment of the River Clyde is, model where there are concrete surfaces, where there's woodlands, where there are buildings, and model what the flow at any particular point on the river will be like. Okay, my final points though, before we have a bit of time for questions. Remember I said about Hicksent draconis, Hebe dragons. We need to always ask ourselves, when we look at a map, where has this map come from? What is the purpose of this map? Because every map tells a story. Every map is a representation of the world from a particular perspective. No map represents complete truth because it's not possible. There was a thought experiment that was represented here by Lewis Carroll, where basically in Sylvie and Bruno, they go through this idea of creating a map that is the same scale as reality. It will have everything that reality has on this map. And of course, fundamentally, that's impractical. Arguably, we've got the technology now that we could create a one-to-one scale map of the world where we could see everything. We could even go beyond, perhaps, a one-to-one scale map of the world. But should we? Because to communicate, to clearly allow us to understand the world around us, we have to make an abstraction. We have to subtract content. And the primary example of this is the tube map. This is Harry Beck, who is the creator of the London tube map. And the reason the London tube map was so successful was because of the information that was stripped away. If you think about it, you think about, actually the subway map here in Glasgow is another good example. It is a very abstract representation of the city. It only has the features that are important to you if you're on that network and you're wanting to find your way between one station and the other. Now, it's been stretched a bit in London as the network has got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's even, probably much harder now for people to interpret than it once was. But the reason it does work so well is we've taken information away. We've chosen just to represent the network, and we represent that network in a very stylized, abstract way. Scale varies across the network, across the map. In the center of London, it's a different scale to the outside of London, because actually when you're traveling on a train, distances aren't as important. But think in those terms, though, whenever you see a map on screen, wherever you see a map presented on television, over the next few weeks when you see all those election maps popping up, there is no truth necessarily. The map is showing you information that the designer of that map wants to communicate to you. And as a result of that, it's perhaps not showing necessarily other types of information. So as in all things, you need to be a knowledgeable consumer. You need to understand what's going on behind the scenes. You need to understand how that map was generated, what it was designed to show, and what it was designed not necessarily to hide, but perhaps not highlight as much as it could have done. So on that point, I'm going to thank you for your time and happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Fascinating stuff there, Ed. Just before we start the questions, we are going to do them in a moment, but if you plan to attend a 10 a.m. talk in one of the other rooms, then at some stage fairly shortly you're going to have to think about making your way to the session. There's going to be a couple of roving microphones in the room, so you can ask questions that way. There is also Slido. So has anybody got any question for a start? Gentleman there, if we can get a microphone to him, please. And we'll come to you next, sir. Okay. Could you identify yourself first, please?
Hi, my name's David Craig. I like maps. So I'm curious, with Google Maps particularly, it's come from a driving background, and obviously transport's been added and pedestrian, but when you do a pedestrian map thing, it still says, "Ooh, be careful out there. Here be dragons," effectively. Yeah. But it doesn't say that for cars. So why is it pedestrian so hard?
That's a very good question. It's largely down to data. Much of the data that we use to create Google Maps comes from originally the data sets that we used to power SatNav. If you remember, you might have had a TomTom once upon a time or so on. We built in the early 90s lots of databases of where the roads were. And the information that we collected for those maps, the attributes we call them, were very much focused on you being a driver and you wanting to get from A to B as quickly as possible. We didn't, and we haven't, until quite recently, started to collect data for pedestrians or cyclists or other people wanting to travel. So we're playing catch up to collect the data that's relevant to you. And the reason we kind of give you the warning when you're a pedestrian sometimes walking is we might well tell you to go down a really, really busy road. We know that there's a pavement there, but it's really busy, and it's probably not a good idea to cross the road if you're walking down an urban dual carriageway. So we need to collect better data to help you as a pedestrian navigate, because as a pedestrian, the things you're interested in many cases, the opposite to what you're interested in if you're a driver. You're looking for quiet streets. If you're walking in the evening, you're looking for streets that have got street lights. We also have that added complexity. If you're walking across grassland, across a park, you're probably not going to follow the path. You're going to go straight across, and we need to work out how to do that. So fundamentally, it's down to the data, and we need to work hard to collect that data. Machine learning is helping us do that, because much of that data comes from images, from pictures, and we can recognize on those pictures the sorts of information that's important to pedestrians, particularly if you're a pedestrian that has wheels. If you've got a pushchair or you use a wheelchair, that sort of information, the data doesn't really exist for that. We need to collect it.
Question off Slido. We'll come to you in a moment, sir. Saying, how could Google Maps be used to keep people safe in the event of a disaster or act of terror?
That's a really good question. That's something that we've been working on for probably a decade or so with an international standards organization called OASIS, and they create something called the Common Alerting Protocol, which is a way that government agencies can communicate where there's been an emergency, be it a natural hazard, terrorist incident, whatever. There's a kind of a standard message that they can then put out, and we can then consume that message, put it into Google Maps, and inform people in the particular area that's impacted by that emergency to say, this has happened, this is what the official advice is to do under those circumstances. So again, it's making use of that idea that maps aren't passive anymore, they're interactive, they're something that will change, can actually message you if the environment around you changes. It's something that's only really emerged for real probably in the last 2 or 3 years, despite the fact that we've been working on this from a decade. You'll remember there was the test that happened here in the UK last year where everyone got that emergency text message. That's part of that process.
If the best, as you said, if the best maps are the ones that are the most used now because of the way these things actually operate, how identifiable is each individual unit?
Not at all. We work really hard to make sure that you as an individual can't be recognized. And the reason that we do that is, if you think about it, your movements through time and space, i.e. how you got here today, if you think about it, is unique to each of you. You all probably got up at a different time, you had your breakfast at a different time, you got here by different routes, different forms of transport. Each of you will have a unique route here, and you'll have a unique route home. And it's really important that we can't recognize that. We can't identify you as an individual, because that unique route is like a fingerprint. So what we do is if you're contributing information to us, that's done anonymously. We don't know who you are, but we also strip the beginning and the end of your journey, so we don't necessarily know where you started. And then we add noise to the data. We move you physically left or right. We move you in time forwards or backwards to make sure that you can't be identified. It's called differential privacy, and it's something that we're working really hard. And again, this is one of those points that, again, do be careful, here be dragons. Most of your applications on your phone that ask for your location now have to do so explicitly. You'll be familiar with that dialog box that comes up and says, you know, X wants to have access to your information. Do you want to share it while you're using the app all the time, blah, blah, blah. Think really carefully about that. It makes sense, if you think about it, to share your location when you're using a Maps application for all the reasons that we pointed out. But if you've installed an application that is a torch on your phone, why would that need to use your location? So always think when you're asked to share your location data.
Good advice. Gentleman there, please.
Hi, thank you. Rory Duncan. I'm an industry analyst with Quick Tech Take. Thanks for that. That was really interesting and really good start to the day. What I particularly liked was you framed this as a question of geography, and you went through how this has changed over the years, and at the end of the day, you said, but beware, this is about informed and knowledgeable consumption. So my question is, are we at risk of perhaps losing some of the more traditional skills of how to read a map? Which, okay, this might be, the grumpy old man here, but as a boy, in geography, we were taught how to, this is a road, this is a river, this is a contour line, and so on. And you have a general knowledge of this is north, that's south, that's west, that's a cloud, it's going to rain. We've all been using electronic devices to tell us where to go and turn left here and so on. Are we becoming over-reliant on them? And the reason I say this is I'm from Edinburgh. There's a notorious little set of steps by the side of the Playhouse, and we regularly see on Reddit vans having tried to go down because they're following the directions. What does Google think about combining, let's say, traditional geographic map reading skills with the electronics, so we don't have 200,000 Taylor Swift fans ending up in Edinburgh in a couple of weeks' time, 210,000, who are going to be wandering around looking at their smartphones and have no idea where they are or where to go?
That's a great question. I don't think we can stop the Swifties from being very focused on their phones over that period of time. I think the point you make is a really valid one. I think sometimes, though, we overestimate how many people can actually navigate from an Ordnance Survey map and use a compass. I mean, show of hands, how many people have an Ordnance Survey map at home? Not bad. How many of you, keep your hands up, can use a silver compass to get a bearing on that map? Probably a bit fewer. So I think the reality is probably we kind of overestimated that ability to navigate that we did when we did, geography at school. We could kind of recognize the contour lines and a church with a steeple and a church with a tower, but very few of us probably could actually make use of a an Ordnance Survey map out in the hills. That said, we're very clear with Google Maps. Google Maps is fundamentally designed for people in urban environments. That's where the richest content is. And if you're out in the highlands, you'll know that there's not much on Google Maps other than the roads and perhaps where the forests are. So I will always say to people, if you're going out hiking, take an Ordnance Survey map with you, and make sure, though, that you can actually read an Ordnance Survey map. You actually understand what's there. But most importantly, make sure you're dressed correctly, you've got the right boots on, and don't mess about, because the Highlands of Scotland, Snowdonia, the Peak District, they're not safe places for you to go wandering around in your flip-flops and a t-shirt. But that's part of that kind of wider knowledge that you really need to have. And I do think you make a good point that because this information is so accessible and so easy to use, we do end up relying on it. I always say to people, if you've got the opportunity, you're going to visit a new city, if you've got the time, just switch your phone off, put it in your back pocket, and just go exploring. Just find out what's there. If you get lost, by all means, take your phone out, switch it back on, and it will get you back to wherever you want to go. But just explore. Just experience a city by walking through it without following directions. Because that's how we used to explore. But I understand that people always want to know where they are.
On the other point, but the other side of things, taking that approach, if you have no particular place to go, you're not minded to go in any particular place, you can't get lost. Wherever you are is the right place. Ed, thank you so much again. That's been fascinating. Thank you. Right.